Hi there. I believe we are live and it's time to kick it off. So, welcome to another design hour. My name is Veronica and I will be your host for today's event. This time it will be all about product discovery. Our lovely speakers are all from Kentico and it will truly get multidisciplinary today as we have there our product manager, UX researcher, UX designer, and tech leader. And they will all tackle the topic from all different angles, which I believe will be really exciting. Speaking of different roles, I really wonder who's with us today, who's watching. So I have a question for you at the very beginning. What is your role? If you can please go to slido.com with the code design hour and answer the first question we have for you. You can also drop any question throughout the event. If you have any question for the speaker, or I don't know, generally, you can just drop it there to the Slido. We also will be hosting, some bigger Q&A session after the event. So there will be plenty of time for answering your questions. While you type your roles into Slido, let me briefly introduce who will speak today. Our first speaker is Tomáš Hrubý, who is our product manager and who will share a story how improving discovery process helped them to get better focus and to, increase happiness in their team. Our second speaker, Adela Svoboda, who will speak from her perspective as a UX researcher while sharing some tips, insights, maybe some mistakes to learn from. There will be also a short break after the first two sessions. And after the break, we will welcome Peter Roth, who is our UX designer. He will shed some light on continuous discovery. Last but not least, Petr Škoda, technical leader. He will talk about how content developers are part of, the continuous discovery and all these topics too, and what it really means. So we can have a look at Slido if there are some answers. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for participating. I can see that there are some UX designers in the majority. There are some product managers, software architects, TL, UX researcher, product designer, developer. Perfect. Nice to see. So I think we can kick it off with Tomáš's presentation. So let me welcome Tomáš.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Veronica. Okay, so we'll have 3 or 4 interesting presentations, so I hope you will enjoy all of them. But the question for the first one is, what's the best way product teams can deliver the best products to the customers? I always was a fan of design thinking, and I always thought that we stepped off on the right foot with product management at Kentico Content, because instead of focusing on solution, we thought about jobs to be done, we're focused on the problems, and we pretty regularly done the research. It's funny because sometimes even stakeholders were unhappy because of us doing too much research, and we regularly test our concepts for usability and viability. But even when we were doing this customer-focused product discovery, things weren't good for a product manager's perspective and from the product team's happiness, etc. Pressure was from both sides. From the team side, it was very difficult to engage the teams and to see involvement in an interest in what is going to be actual impact on the customer. And inside the team, every smallest decision and a question about the problem and the solution was on the shoulders of the product manager. Then from the stakeholders' point of view, there wasn't evidently enough trust for the stakeholders not to intervene in what's going to be delivered and what's not. Also, our roadmap contained a lot of important things that we always felt a constant pressure to focus on the next big thing on the pipeline. So these are pretty serious things to solve. And luckily, this was like 2 years ago before we started changing the way we work with the teams and with the stakeholders. A funny thing is that I stumbled upon these social media posts from Teresa Torres. And funny thing about that is that back then I genuinely thought that everything would be better and it would solve all the problems if the project management responsibilities were handed over onto someone else, for example, the team or a project manager. But I couldn't have been more wrong, because as it turned out, it was just a symptom of a deeper issue of how we do the product discovery. So during this session, I wanted to share with you the steps that we took, perhaps to inspire also other product teams. My name is Thomas Ruby. I work as a product manager at Kentico Content, and I really like to have a chat with you about product discovery or your issues with product management or experience at your company. So please connect on the socials and reach out sometimes. So product discovery. Discovery in general is a very generic word, so it helps to frame the concept somehow. Well, in software development, there is always a risk that your ideas are biased and that you don't actually deliver the actual value to the customer, and you are not able to collect it and therefore waste the efforts. And product discovery, from the product management point of view, is aiming at reducing this risk by focusing more on the problem and less on the solution. So 2 years back, the process we called product discovery was a series of the following steps. First, the product manager aligned on the desired outcome and things that we needed to solve with other product managers and with the stakeholders. Then, primarily the product manager, but sometimes with the help of a designer, they researched the topic, everything that we needed to know in order to move on to the definition phase, where typically the product manager defined a good mental model how to divide the different jobs to be done inside a problem space and picked priorities and a set of important jobs to be done, to be solved. Then typically a PM with the designer ideated a solution and tested it for its usability. And this ended the discovery phase. The output was kind of like the MVP that we then communicated to the rest of the company and also to the customers. And then the delivery was more agile, right? We were chopping up to multiple releases. After each one, we revisited the scope, changed the priorities, and typically at the end of this, we ended up with something different that was originally planned, or the delivery prolonged by a few weeks or months. And this was undermining the relationship of stakeholders and the teams and their trust. And that was mostly because we were continuing to do two main mistakes. First, that we aligned on the output, and then because we did only linear and not continuous discovery. So the outputs. The MVP that what we defined, it was not solution focused. It was still jobs to be done, but very specific activity jobs to be done that were in the scope. And since the things rapidly changed throughout the delivery process, it stopped making sense to align on this. So instead of, for example, aligning on things like, or goals like, we wanted our users to be able to group content into semantic structures or groups or folders, we needed to come up with why we are actually doing this, what we are trying to achieve. If we were successful, what would life look like? How we want to transform the customer's behavior. So instead of saying that, we would align with others on that we want multi-team companies to perform their content production or content operations in the same place. And then the organizational aspect is just a core part of that. So the aligning on the outcomes helped giving a blur to the scope a bit, but still other departments or stakeholders might evaluate or see different criteria for meeting that outcome. And basically, you know the concepts of OKRs probably. We started adopting them and removed the focus on the scope completely. So this was the first important step. Then there is the time aspect for us, which is pretty critical because most of the features that we do and most of the customers that we work with are large enterprises. And it's so difficult for them to adopt new features and change how they do things because first, it's typically requires implementation or changing the process. It's expensive and they have other priorities. So after we release something, we typically have a feedback lag of several weeks or months until we have actionable feedback. So that led us to make two more changes. First, adopting more experimental approach, and then changing how we aligning with the customers and the rest of the company through our roadmap. So what I mean by the experimental mindset is that instead of focusing on the single discovery and trying to solve the outcome or meet the outcome in a single cycle, we embrace the idea that we weren't able to do that, and there is the feedback lag. And instead of that, we chopped or we perceived what we are trying to deliver more as market experiments. The main goal of the market experiments is for us to test and be able to aim better, not to ship, especially in the first phases. So instead of thinking in MVPs, what we actually did was first deliver something that's testable, but it couldn't be called viable. Typically, what we are doing is we are releasing early accesses or closed betas just for us to learn. Then in the initial phases, then we redo most of the phases of the discovery. And typically we either pivot or build on top of the solution. And in 2 or more iterations, hopefully we are able to meet the objective or perhaps abandon an objective completely. So typically a team is working on 2 objectives at the same time, one stale and one active, right? So adopting this experimental mindset was a necessary step, but it was also necessary to communicate it better to the outside world. So the time aspect on the roadmap actually blocked us, and actually a lot of customers and commercial department members were counting on the many important features that were there to be delivered in that time frame. And we were just unable, because of limited resources, to focus on so many topics at the same time. So we had limited resources and we needed to communicate the fact that we are only able to focus on a few outcomes at the same time through a different type of roadmap. So in the theme-based roadmap, it helped us communicate exactly the same thing. You could imagine it as having 3 main horizons with different types of confidence. The next horizon is something that most probably we are going to be focusing on, but again, some important priorities might crop up. The later horizon is something that it's purely for information of what might be the important topics a year from now, but they are very likely to change. And we also have the evaluating topics that we don't consider core parts of our products yet, and are waiting for the feedback to come up, and then the topic is going to appear in the now or the next phases. Of course, everything that we put on the roadmap, we try to do it outcome-oriented and not solution or scope-oriented. Yeah, so these 3 things, aligning on the outcome instead of output, then doing a continuous experimental approach discovery, and communicating it clearly to all of our customers and the departments was an important step for the stakeholders to trust us that we do the product the best way. So what about the teams now? What is actually a developer's job, right? Should they code, or what is their job? So that's a great question, because as you might seen that the previous discovery process was heavily PM-led. Most of the things were decided by the PM, and actually that caused that every single question about the solution or a problem needed to be answered by the product manager. And don't get me wrong, but I think that product managers sometimes cause this issue because they think that it's their job to decide and only communicate what's important to the teams, either developers or designers, not to overwhelm them with unnecessary details. And it couldn't be further from the truth, because the teams only having bits and pieces of information and not the full context is the actual problem why they can't take ownership and accountability over the solution. So the ideal state we wanted to achieve is that the product manager is responsible for first choosing the right outcome and then help the team navigate the problem space, give them the necessary context. Whereas the team's role, we want it to be the accountability on that the solution is meeting the outcome and that it will build effective solutions. So how did we do that? Well, we started from the end of the discovery process and went backwards and tried to involve the devs and the designers and made them a core part of the discovery process. So the first most natural part for the teams is the delivery. And well, developers hate extra work, right? And the OKRs were very often perceived as such. And the important mistake that we were making is that the product manager came up with the key results and they imposed that on the team. So instead of that, we needed to be having the discussions and having the teams coming up with the key results themselves. And typically what we do in this experimental approach is that in the early phases, we are focusing more on the qualitative insights, for example, in-depth case studies or one or two first adopters. Then in later phases of the discovery, in the later cycles of the discovery, we switch to more quantitative metrics like conversion funnels or adoption funnels. And in the initial phases, we are focusing more on the leading metrics, which means that they don't give us exact confidence that people adopted the feature or were successful in their task, but it's the first steps that indicate that they might do that in the future. Whereas in the later phases, we put key results that are more assuring and more stable and that actually represent meeting the actual goal. An important shift in this was that the actual team was actually reporting the what we learned and the progress in the key results to the stakeholders. This kicked off an interesting dynamic within the teams because we funded or started meeting regularly every 2 weeks on meetings that we call TNOKRs, when things that typically only a product manager did, for example, getting information from customer success about customers' adoption of that feature, or from sales, or basically communicating the progress of the adoption. And that was something that we started assigning to the team's backlog and we discussed together. So this increased the involvement and accountability on the effectiveness of the solution a lot. And what we are trying to experiment now, and we can share them the results in the future, is that we would like to invite also other departments to work in this phase. Because why not, for example, revenue operations and the marketing can't join us in these discussions and be aligned on what we are trying to achieve and also chime in with their initiatives, for example, helping promote the feature better, etc. So before that, it's important to build the team's accountability of the solution itself. Then you can build on the accountability of the effectiveness of the solution. And the mistake that we were making is that the ideation phase was mostly done by the PM and the UX designer, sometimes with a dev representative. However, it's a very good idea to invite everyone in a design studio to start building and them investing their effort into the solution. A risk or a pitfall of a good design studio is always the framing. You don't want it to be too broad because you get lost and ineffective. You don't want it to be too solution focused because you lose the creativity aspect. A good framework for this for the teams is the how might we questions that you might Google later. And then the important part when you actually come up with the solutions and then prioritize, not to prioritize the product manager instead of the themes. What you should be doing is to provide the necessary context and background for teams to be able to prioritize by themselves. And then a few frameworks for prioritization. If you have competing ideas, a good ways or frameworks to compare is impact mapping or opportunity solution trees. And if you have a single idea, which can be then still narrowed down, a good framework is user story mapping for that. So that's the solution and how we can make the team actually a solution owner. So how about the phase before that? That's actually the main domain of the product manager. They are the problem owner. And what we do, we create in this phase documents that we call problem definitions, which are really comprehensive guides or maps of the problem landscape. They typically include from the high level things like a business outcome, actually why we are doing this instead of other things, why now, why not later. Then things about the problem, which are the personas involved, what are the jobs to be done involved. And actually, in complex problem spaces, the product manager is responsible for coming up with a good mental model how to divide the problem space to more digestible chunks and how to navigate that. But also things like adjacent concepts. For example, right now we are trying to achieve an objective that all types of content can be approved within Kentico, and but we also have a concept of tasks, for example. So how does this concept compete? Should we revisit one? Should we merge them, etc.? So this complexity and the systemic impact should be inside a problem definition too, but also the long-term vision so that we can deliver value that we can then build on top of and compound in the future. And also naturally the competition, but not in a descriptive way, but instead a good and bad examples of how competitors are trying to reach the outcome with the customers. So again, the same thing as in the ideation phase, it's a good idea to involve designers and developers in this phase too. For example, we were very successful with developers doing the competition analysis or designers doing that because they start to absorb and build a picture. And when we are talking about the absorption, it's very important. This phase typically happens, the definition phase, when team is delivering the previous objective or is one cycle behind. But it's very important that the whole team finds enough time to absorb and to discuss the problem space so that they can then proceed and make the ideation effective. The mistake that I was doing, it was being too passive in the discussions, just asking whether everything is clear, everyone then nods their heads, was wrong. And I now tend to be more interactive, trying to ask the developers, designers to repeat what issues they are seeing and how they see the problem space, and try to be more interactive this way. So if we then move even one step closer or back in time, the exploration phase. The mistake that I was making here was involving the designer too late in the process. Typically, I prepared the research design, and then together with the designer, we did the sessions. Then mostly I analyzed the results, sometimes with the designer. But right now, the best thing I could change and do differently was to involve the designer from the day one when I know what the objective is going to be, and do the problem of the research design and the execution analysis together. And a tip, since you are doing this phase before or when the previous experiment is being delivered, book at least 4 weeks to do, because it's impossible and then you will get into a lag. And another thing is how to involve the devs in this process. And we don't invite developers anymore, at least in my teams, on the research calls. It's a different story when we are talking about testings, like usability or concept testings, because they are swift, but the research calls are pretty long. And instead, what we found more effective is we booked 15 or 20 minutes, for example, after daily stand-up, for bite-sized empathy sessions, where like for 7 minutes, we present a comprehensive journey of the customer or story of the customer, and then we discuss like what problems we can solve, what are the risks, what are the unknowns, we don't know yet, and again, make this more interactive. So yeah, basically these were the steps how we could build the engagement and accountability for making an effective solution that meets the outcome eventually for the designers and the developers. So the steps, to sum them up, was first to start aligning on the outcome instead of output, then to not do the MVPs and single discovery, but to embrace the fact that you should do it continuously and that you are able to achieve the outcome in a few iterations, then make the developers and the designers core contributors of most of the phases of the discovery. And then the product manager's main responsibility is to drive the discovery process and to provide the necessary context and mental models for navigating the problem space. And last but not least, nicest thing about this is that it's not just the PM stuff, because once developers or designers understand the process and how it is best done, then also they can introduce the changes and push their team and their product manager to doing things better and more effectively. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I would welcome your questions.
Thank you, Tomáš. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really insightful. If you want to ask Tomáš some question, please go ahead, slido.com with key hashtag design hour and just shoot questions. Meanwhile, I have a question for you, Tomáš. You were talking about some various phases of the discovery process. And I wonder, what about the alignment phase? How are the teams involved in this phase?
Yeah, so alignment phase actually is written here in the beginning, but actually it happens in multiple places. So the first alignment, what I mean by that is alignment on the outcome. And that's typically thing that the product manager still does mainly, but again, teams should be aligned on the objective. Then next alignment is in the definition phase, because you need to sometimes zoom into a specific area of the problem space. And then another phase of the alignment is when you're creating the experiments, because especially the leading metrics, the leading key results, you are able to do with a combination of the solution. So there are actually three phases where to do the alignment, and during the experiments, teams are the main drivers of that. During the definition phase, they should be heavily aligned, and during the first alignment phase, it's like 80-20, 80% product managers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. We also have one question in Slido, so we can have a look. So you mentioned feedback lag. How can you be sure that it was the changes you made in one iteration are the cause of the feedback you detected later on? Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So the main thing for us is to meet the objective. So, and if we meet the objective by chance, and there is low probability of that it's still a good outcome for us, right? Since the key results, especially the lagging one that tell us that we met the objective, actually are connected to the objective, then it's a good thing we meet them. And doing the, so basically that's that. And the feedback lag it's just the thing that we need to incorporate, and for us to make sure that we are not losing attention from an outcome or a topic after the first iteration, but keep it, for example, for a half a year or 3/4 of a year.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I hope it answered the question. So there are no other questions in the Slido. So you can still ask more questions about this topic, put it into Slido. We can get back to it later at the end of the session. So for now, thank you Tomáš very much.
Thanks.
And we can have a few words from Adela now. So let me do the switch. And here's your presentation, Adele, and it's yours.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Tomáš, for the great presentation. My name is Adela, and I've been working as a UX researcher here at Kentico for the past 4 years. So it probably makes sense that today I will be talking about the research side of things, how to do it, and what not to forget, etc. So let me start by specifying what actually is it that I'm going to be talking about, because you might have heard a lot of names and a lot of different terms like discovery research or generative research or exploratory research or foundational research, etc. And I just wanted to specify, because for me, I feel like these are all the same names for one thing, and that's the exploratory research during the discovery phase, actually. So yeah, but what does it actually do? And it actually does what it says. It's aimed to explore, to create knowledge or understanding where there is none or is somehow maybe limited. But it definitely does not intend to offer final and conclusive solutions to our existing problems. So beware. I want to talk about a bit how it's done, how this exploratory research is done, and it's typically qualitative. The data gathering methods that are often used are observations and interviews, and from them there are a lot of other methods that we can use. For example, the contextual inquiry and case studies or ethnographic research. But all of this is basically just, it works upon the observations and interviews. What's really good to note is that exploratory research is usually not very structured, and it can very much be driven by the participant. In reality, it means that I can come into an interview with a participant with just the starting questions that define the area of interest. And then we will just work with what the participant brings into the interview. This way, we can actually make sure that we are not bringing some preconceptions or some biases of ours into the interview. So this is really good to know. And there's one very, very important method that's often overlooked, and Tomáš was mentioning it, which is really great, and I'm really grateful, because it's secondary analysis. What it basically means is that we are looking into already existing data, and we are looking for some sort of information or insights into our problem space or our problem area. This is great because it can help us make the research more sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I actually mean that it saves time and energy, not only for us as researchers or designers or PMs or whoever is making the research or doing the research, but also for the participant. And for them, it means not only the time and energy, but also their willingness to actually speak with us. So it's really important to do it. And we should be doing it in every research, or at the beginning of every research, if it's possible. Oftentimes, when we're doing exploratory research and we really don't know anything, it's not possible. But yeah, if it's possible, then we should definitely do it. Well, another thing I wanted to mention is with how many people should we be doing the research? It's usually a small-ish sample, and I bet that you have already heard the magic formula of 5 to 7 participants. And I actually wonder what you guys think and what's your experience when doing research. How many people did you need or use? Because for me, the magic formula is kind of makes sense and kind of doesn't. Because you can, for example, do case studies, which is a research with only one single participant, and it's still great and it still works. And on the other hand, you can have a very varied population, which means that you should include the different groups of people into your research, which means then 5 to 7 participants per group, which then makes the qualitative research very big. But in general, when we are doing exploratory research or qualitative research, we are usually gathering data until the topics that we hear are no longer new. When we are hearing all the repeating topics, then that's an indicator that we should move on or go with the analysis. we are looking at the quality of the data instead of quantity, which is great. I like it. So if we can take a look at like an example from Kentico Content, which is the product that I work on, and there are different people that use different parts of the product, and they have different motivations and different use cases and different jobs. And so if anyone came to me and said, okay, we need to do this research with all of our users, that would mean I would take all of these groups and do I don't know, 5 to 7 probably interviews with every group. But usually that's not how it works, and usually it's more focused on like 1 or 2 groups, which is really great, and it should be like that. But yeah, this is a great question that I'm pretty sure some of you have heard it before in some way or form. Will the results be valid or with such a small sample, or is it applicable to all of our users? And I don't think it's the right question to ask, actually, because qualitative research is inherently different from the quantitative research. Qualitative research seeks deep insights and understanding of lived experience, whereas quantitative research seeks to generalize and to generalize the information and to bring objective data. This difference in the core quality of both approaches really makes it difficult to apply these things. And I think that we should not force quantitative measures onto qualitative data. So just my thought. As I mentioned just now, the outcomes we can expect are in the realm of like understanding and deep knowledge and getting to know the experience of our participants. And I think it's important to know that why we are gathering this knowledge. And I think that's because we want to make data-informed decisions, which means that we don't take the data as they are and work with them directly. We just take them and combine them with other areas or other aspects that are important for us, which can be product goals or market trends or whatever is important to you. And we take this bundle of information and we make decisions based on all of that. We are not making decisions based solely on the data, which means that we don't really have to do what the participants tell us. Sometimes they come up with problems and with solutions in one go, the participants, but we might not want to do any of it, and it's okay. I think it's more than fine. When you're looking at like tangible outcomes of discovery research, it can be even more questions that we have to answer, or another area to study or look into, or maybe a finalized problem statement or user journey maps or personas, and it all depends on what we are actually doing. Well, I would like to talk about how to actually do it. Of course, there are different methods and different approaches, but let's just take a look at some things that we should always consider. Even when there's no prior knowledge to a topic or an area, we should always prepare a research design with defined research goals and research questions. Usually when you see questions or words like why or explore or explain or how, it usually hints that we are going to be using the qualitative side of things. So that's a nice little thing that, why forming your research goals and questions can really help you in the methodology of things. And it's also good to know that research questions can change when it comes to exploratory research. We can start very, very broad. And while we are doing the interviews, for example, the research question can actually narrow down and be more focused on a specific area that maybe have the most unknowns or presents the greatest opportunities. We can take a look at the example here that I have. And it basically says that we aim to understand how our users learn to use our product. And this might be the general question. And during the research, we find out that they often, are taught by one of their colleagues. So this is maybe something that we want to focus on more. So this means that we can narrow down the broad research question and narrow it down to, asking about how does it work when they are teaching, what questions are they asking. So this is something that happens, and it's good that it happens. So don't be afraid to actually change the research design in the process of doing the research itself. As Tomáš was saying, it's really, really important to collaborate during this phase because you want to align the expectations properly. I often saw people expecting different outcomes or results from the research, and then they were disappointed that it's not what they wanted or expected. So it's really important to align the expectations in this stage. There's one thing to note as well, and that's that when it comes to exploratory research, there are no hypotheses usually, because for you to form a hypothesis, you should have like prior knowledge and base it on that, which you don't have. So just to make it clear. This is actually something that we use in Kentico a lot. And I tried to make everyone actually who does research to use something like this. And it's a research design template. As you can see, it's fairly simple. There are some things to fill out, and everything has some sort of information and examples. And this is something that I believe Verča can share with you guys in the chat, I hope. So feel free to use it if you want to. I find it really helpful, especially when there are several different roles that are doing the research. It's not just the user research people. It's also designers and PMs. Great. So let me just in general talk about how to gather the data. There are many different methods, as you saw earlier, how to gather the data. But whatever the method is, it's great being open and curious. It's really helpful because it makes the participant feel right, and it can really help us gain deeper knowledge. We should always work with what was being said or observed, and try to look at it objectively and without interpretation. We should vibe with the participant and try to understand their point of view without any judgment. This is something that I feel like you should collaborate with your team as well. You can invite them to the calls or the observations, and this is important, you should always include them in the discussion if you are narrowing down the research question. Because if you're changing the research design, everyone should be on the same page as well again. We talk very generically about how it's done, but let's just briefly talk about how to approach doing one of the most basic methods, and that's an interview. As I mentioned already, it's great to invite your team members to join in. It's usually PMs or designers, but as Tomáš said, they are not inviting developers anymore, but we were doing it, and and we are still doing it when it comes to usability testings. And there's one great thing, if anyone is too shy to come, it really worked wonders when I made it very, very clear that they don't have to speak, and that it's really okay to just silently observe, and that when I really communicated this well, people started, asking if they can come. So this is a pro tip. Another important thing, especially during the exploratory interview, is building rapport. It's a sort of a relationship with the participant, because it's way easier to share when you are feeling good, and not when the researcher is actually making you feel uncomfortable. And yeah, there's a lot of things that can be said about different interview techniques or how to ask the right questions. And I wrote some articles about it, so you can check them out if you want to. But the most important thing is to react to what was said and not what you think was said or what wasn't said at all. And then focusing on asking about personal experience and trying to avoid hypothetical questions. Well, there. These are actually some things that I like to bring to when I'm doing interviews, and it really is helping me personally. The thing in the upper left corner is my notes, actually. I don't really like to write like interview notes during interview because it. I don't think they would ever work that well as when I'm writing them from a recording. So if I can help it, I will do just these kind of notes. And this is what I actually write down is usually things that I want to ask about more or probe deeper, or things that I find interesting or surprising, something that maybe I haven't heard yet, and then it can also help me during the analysis. And the thing on the lower right is a user interview checklist, which lists some things that we should talk about during the first and last phase of the interview. And it's really great. It helps a lot not to forget anything, especially when you are not used to doing interviews very often. And this is something that we can share with you as well. I think Vercha can share it with you in the chat again. And feel free to use it if you find it helpful. Great. So I really want to talk very, very, very shortly about how to analyze the data, because it's a very important step in the way, but it's a very complex topic, and it depends on what method are we using, or even on what approach we're going with to the analysis. So yeah, it's just like the flash that you can see here. I'm going to be running away from this topic and moving on, because it's something that I feel is for the whole book, and with the different approaches. So yeah, it's not that much time for it here. But let's say that you have the insights and you want to communicate them. So how to share them effectively? I feel like the most effective way is actually involve your team and make them part of the process. You can invite some of them to the analysis, but you can also share the unfinished results with them from time to time. Even though they are unfinished, it's okay to share them and talk about them. And that way everyone feels involved and, as part of the process, which is really great. Also, when sharing your actual findings, and as cliche as it might be, video snippets and direct quotes are really very, very powerful and should be incorporated in your in the results. There's one more thing that I find very important and often overlooked, and that's the limitations of the study. We should really look at the limits that we faced. Maybe it was the sample, maybe it was the methods, and we should admit to them, because this way we can work with the results better, or even plan further research better. So it's really important to do this. Okay, well, we talked about what discovery research or exploratory research is, and you've heard me talk about some tips and some of the processes. And if I want you to take something from all of this, it would be this. Collaborate with others along the way, be data informed and not data driven, know what outcomes you can expect and aligned your and your team's expectations as well. And the researcher's mantra, be open and curious. Thank you. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Adele. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it. Especially, I like the part about sustainable research and this stuff. I think it's always a good idea to run a secondary analysis and then do, the new research over and over again. So I think it was really, really great. Before we go to Slido, we have some questions there. I have a question myself. Because you have led countless of interviews and so many people preparing and leading the research. So what mistakes do you often see people make?
That's an interesting question. Well, when it comes to the exploratory research, what I often encountered, not so much lately, but in the past, it was the wrong expectations of the outcomes. When I started working at Kentico, I learned the hard way that I should really talk about it a lot and explain everything and discuss the goals with the people and talk about what kind of outputs or outcomes they're expecting. So this is something that's a really big thing, and I feel like should be taken care of well. And when it comes to the interviews, actually, there are some things that are happening quite a lot, especially with people that are not that much experienced, and that's asking the wrong kinds of questions, like leading or hypothetical questions, and that's something that's happening a lot, and also presuming. I often notice people are asking about things that the participants never talked about, and that they never said it happened, and the person leading the interview is asking questions about something that wasn't there. So that's something that I think really we should work on as designers, I guess, and PMs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks a lot. I think that's fine. Answered. We have several questions here, so I hope we can have a look at least at some of them. So we have a question here. Maybe I didn't get that, but why 5 to 7 participants to speak to? Why this number? Do you have a hint?
Yeah, it's something that's when you are looking in the internet, how many people do you need? It's usually this sort of thing, and I feel like it's true. It can work, but what I said and what I really think is important to note is that when you're doing qualitative research, you should do the interviews, let's say, as long as you're still getting new topics from the participants, which can be 5 to 7 participants, but it can also be 10 or 12 or 4, right? So it really depends very much on the topic that you're discussing with them and on the target population. I hope it answered the question.
Yep, I think so. Thank you. Another question here is, do you have any good tips for bringing stakeholders to discovery research? Is it a good idea?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends on the relationships. I really try to build good relationships across the company. And when I'm tasked to do something, I just, go out of my way to share everything that I'm doing and to share the thought process behind it. And this way, even if it's with the stakeholders or, I don't know, the management or whatever, I feel like I never encountered anything negative out of this. And it can be, inviting them for a session, either, either doing the research design together with them, or, you doing it with, I don't know, PMs or the designers or me, and then discussing the outcomes, the finished research design with the stakeholders, and showing them, okay, this is something that I'm going to do, this is how it's going to work, and then inviting them to the calls as well. It really works well to just overshare.
Mm-hmm.
And not everything has to be a meeting, right?
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Maybe a similar question, but regarding developers. Do you invite all developers from the team to usability testing sessions? If so, isn't it overwhelming for the participants? So many people watching.
Oh, yeah, it's an awesome question. I'm very strictly for maximum of 3 people on our side at one interview call. We usually do remote calls and testings. That's why I'm saying call. Sorry, but I'm strictly for 3 people maximum, which is usually me or the one leading the interview, and either PM or designer, and or the stakeholder, and the developer when it comes to the usability testings. What this means is that usually the developers can take turns during one usability testing run, which is great. And some teams actually did this awesome thing that they took the recording from the usability testing and they watched it together as a team. All the developers watched it together and they talked about it, which I find really lovely, and it's really great. And it was not even my initiative, so it was it was really great. So yeah, it was a great question, and I feel like 3 people are more than enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. I think we can go through all the questions, as there's one left.
Okay.
So, do you store raw research insights? Is it good practice to leverage the insights outside of the given analysis?
Oh, actually, yeah. Actually, that's part of the secondary research. When you take the existing data, which can be, the raw research insights or any research insights, and you take a look at them from a different perspective or through a different lens, right? And looking for things that would help you better understand the things that you are now trying to understand or learn about. So yeah, I think it's definitely good. It's a bit different with quantitative data, I feel, but with qualitative data, it's definitely okay.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. There is one more question. I hope we can answer it as well. What are the good tools to store research insights? Any tips?
That's a good question. Well, we are using several different tools. We are using Product Board for all insights. Even if I'm doing like a interview or really exploratory deep quality research, I'm storing the interview notes in Product Board. But I'm not really working that much with them when they are there. And we also store the more the results. We are storing them in on Confluence. And what we started using like a maybe even a year ago is Condense, and it's actually a really nice tool to work with qualitative data, and it can help you code the data and work with the tags and everything, and that's really nice, and it works kind of well so far.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you very much. We went through all the questions. Thank you for the answers and for the questions as well. Ask more. We will go through all the questions at the end of the event. So I think as we are like an hour in the event, I would suggest to take a short break, and we will see each other in 5 minutes. Yeah. I'm muted. Okay. I hope you heard the sound of the, when the alarm started. So welcome back. We have 2 talks left. I hope you enjoyed the previous ones. Don't forget to ask questions at slido.com with the code Design Hour. We really look forward to your questions. And now, without further ado, let me welcome Peťo Roth, our UX designer, who will share his thoughts. So, Peťo, it's yours.
Great. First of all, thank you, Veronica, for a lovely introduction. Actually, the more and more I worked on this talk and deeper I got into this topic, the more I started to feel that the better title for this talk would be how not to get crazy running continuous discovery as a designer. But I promise I will be kind of true to the original title, and I will talk about empathy as well. As Tomáš and Adela mentioned before, product discovery is about answering the question, what are we going to build next? Basically, in discovery, you want to uncover and explore users or customers' needs, frustrations, and desires. I believe that all of us are familiar with Double Diamond or some similar problem-solving framework, where in the beginning you discover and explore the problem space, then you converge to a single problem definition, then you go into a super creative mode and design many different, innovative, or sometimes groundbreaking solutions. And in the end, you slim it down to one optimal and, usually not that groundbreaking solution. However, from my experience, many designers and many product teams see this as a static or fixed framework, a recipe they should follow, and it's not a bad recipe either. You usually get good results when you finish it. However, if you want to deliver something exceptional, you need to think outside of the recipe sometimes. Many product teams see discovery as a unique one-time opportunity to dive deep and learn about customer problems and issues, like a deep dive into a problematic or like learning week at the beginning of some project. And we can visualize it like this. Here on top, we have a set of features or opportunities going on in time. And here on bottom is the depth and the amount of knowledge we usually gather for a project. And that's a crucial mistake right there, to perceive what we do as separate projects or completely distinct features. Tomáš mentioned it and mentioned a very great quote from Teresa Torres about this. In real product development, to consider user or customer needs or problems separately as a separate cases does work in a short term. You'll get a solution to it, but over time, the whole experience will start to feel fragmented, kind of disconnected, and in the worst case, kind of clunky. Why is it that? How does that happen? That's in part caused by the fragmentation and silos in the organization. There's this concept called Conway's Law. The product basically mirrors the structure of the organization and the communication in the organization. And that's something that's often out of our reach to address as designers. Or maybe not, but that's for another talk. Another cause to this falling apart is basically too much focus. When we focus on exploring a particular niche of the life or the problem space of our users or customers, we will necessarily lack the knowledge of their context. And the context can often be more valuable than anything else we learn. Continuous discovery is a great tool to get this context, to collect it, and to be able to learn from it. As Adela mentioned many times, the secondary analysis, for example. But it's a huge, huge, huge opportunity. So in the next couple of minutes, I will share with you a couple of things that helped me and helped us in our organizations and teams to do it well. I'm not saying that this will be a silver bullet or another great recipe you should just follow. Most probably not. Some of this stuff might come as a super obvious, but in my experience, I somehow knew this stuff existed in the background, but only after I gave it some explicit name I could address and improve these things more. And maybe, and as convoluted or off topic some of these things might seem, please bear with me. I promise they will all merge together in the end. And I hope you'll find at least some of it interesting or inspiring. So let's get into it. Thing number one, the information flows. Each of us who has ever took a part in a proper product discovery or exploratory research for something completely new knows it can be super overwhelming. There's all kinds of information floating around and worth noticing or consideration. Usually we get a lot of customer feedback, some stuff that's passively collected over time. We have active research inputs from the calls. We have stakeholder inputs, the amount of priority we should give to something, the bigger overarching goals and objectives set up for the upcoming period. Or we have a lot of information about implementation limits. Okay, what can be done, what cannot be done. We have a lot of collaborative overlaps, meaning, okay, these guys over there are working on something similar or something that has an influence on the problem that you're solving. We get a lot of insight from sales teams many times, some reports from customer success managers. Support tickets are super, super, super useful source of information. And a lot of quantitative data we tracked, various analytics, business analytics, etc., etc., etc. Well, that's a lot of stuff, right? Deep discovery and focused exploration can be pretty stressful and overwhelming. And here you might be asking, like, how the hell are we supposed to do this and pay attention to all this all the time? Well, basically, you don't. And you don't have to do it all the time either. So you just have to be kind of smart about this. And the first thing you're gonna need is you're gonna need some boxes. And this brings me to thing number two, the three biggest boxes. If you take a closer look at all the information flows I mentioned earlier and try to sort them out in some meaningful categories or in some meaningful way, you'll see that you can put 99% of the information into three big boxes. It's going to be either domain knowledge, product knowledge, or organizational knowledge. So what does that mean? It's quite like general. Well, so the domain knowledge means this is the problem space of our users or our customers. Basically, what are the problems, issues, or desires that we are trying to solve for them? So to this box falls all the user or customer or market research info we have, all the knowledge we have about the issues they encounter. It's basically all an answer to the question, what are we solving for them? Box number two, product knowledge. This speaks about what are the capabilities and mainly what are the gaps of our product, of the stuff we build. Where's the tech and usability that? And what can be done with our product and what can we build to our product? So what goes into this box, you might ask. Here is a tiny overlap with the domain knowledge, stuff like case studies of your customers or usability feedback. But mainly it's about the capabilities of your product, its general architecture, and basically what can be solved and built with and to our product in a reasonable amount of time and effort. And the last box, the organizational knowledge. This is the knowledge of your organization. How does anything get built, shipped, basically done in your organization? And here goes the exact thing I mentioned earlier, the organizational overlap. info about people and teams working on a similar stuff, or something that influences your stuff. This might not be such an issue, or you might not think this is a big thing if you're in a smaller organization, but imagine you're in a huge multinational corporate and you start to discover that you might cater some need of some of your customer. And only after you spend, I don't know, 2 or 3 months working on it, you realize that, okay, there's another team on the other side of the planet that does exactly this thing. So, and you haven't contacted them. This is where the organizational knowledge is like super crucial. And another thing that goes here are the big strategic motivations and their changes. Basically, the question here is who does what, when, and why. Well, all right. Now we sorted all the information and have it nice and systematic. However, there can still be a bit too much of the information, right? And yeah, thing number 3, balance, or the right stuff at the right time. And this is exactly what's missing many times in continuous discovery efforts from my experience. This is actually the most important thing to realize if you want to run continuous discovery in a sustainable manner. And to be honest, the path to continuous discovery is actually much easier and much more straightforward than you think. You see, if you're in a bigger organization, and in many smaller organizations as well, all of the information flows I described to you and categorized just now happen regardless of your attention. If you just need to tune in and like add a little volume to that. The key thing is to tune in regularly and as frequently as possible, and to grab others in your teams to come listen with you, or to tell them regularly what you heard, such as Tomáš mentioned in his talk, with these weekly empathy moments after regular meetings. Of course, you will need to listen to different channels of information at different stages of your development process. First, you need to gain sufficient domain knowledge and to be able to understand the issues. And without paying attention to product and organizational knowledge, you'll rarely get something done. And by doing so, by listening to this information regularly and frequently, you can turn this into this. And what does this mean? What do I want to say with this? Basically, I'm sorry, I lost my notes for a second. Yeah. So this way you can gather and learn much more information, and you'll get much more holistic picture of the problem space. You can make better decisions and transfer knowledge from one opportunity or field to another. This is exactly what was Adela mentioning regarding the secondary research. And this is where the true magic happens, actually, when you get the big, but also detailed and nuanced picture. You can do a lot of like so-called lateral knowledge, and you can gain a lot of lateral knowledge throughout the processes like this. Stuff that's not at the center of your attention right now, but something that has an impact on the object of your curiosity. Another key thing for maintaining continuous discovery is to generate a lot of contextual knowledge. And how do you do that? Well, basically by being a good researcher and not throwing information out. What do I mean by that? Well, let me give you a practical example that's happening right now in the organization. Actually, right now I'm in the middle of a deep discovery dive for the next thing my product team will build. It will be probably an improved user management capability. And I lead quite a lot of exploratory user interviews and map out the terrain at the moment. And during these interviews, I basically gather data. That's the main function of it. Some stuff is directly related to the subject. This is the core knowledge. But overall, it might be like at most 50 or 60% of the information. that I learned during the session. And what about the rest? Some is just fluff. Okay, that's some small talk, chit chat, respondent, onboarding, offboarding. But the rest, that's usually the context. All the stuff that happens or is perceived by your user or customer, besides the pains or desires you are trying to learn about. Make sure not to filter out this knowledge, and make sure to record it and share it with your teams, because all this stuff might be useful or crucial, not just for someone else, but for developing your true empathy. Because only by deep knowledge of the context of your users, and it's many variations, it will be different from user to user and organization or organization, only then we're able to truly empathize with them. Which brings me to the last thing. There is not just one kind of empathy. Speaking of empathy, it became a true buzzword in the design world, right? The original meaning and context made a lot of sense decades ago when our field started, and there was almost zero attention to non-technical users. However, the mindless overuse got it quite a bad rap nowadays. Many times it promotes the notion that we designers should focus just on the user. So the stuff we produce meets their needs, expectations, and standards. Well, that's certainly good, but it's not realistic. In order to build stuff useful and usable to users, we need to take care of many other aspects: business viability, technological feasibility, ability to address and communicate and manage it across the organization, or how well the change or the feature we're trying to make plays out with other parts of the product or initiatives, or more importantly, how does it work in the context of our user. And I like to call this thing holistic empathy. User empathy is an important part of the puzzle, but make sure you're not paying attention to just that one part of the puzzle. Or worse, just to a tiny fragment of the piece by ignoring and throwing away the context. Because the context and the repeated exercise in gathering it is what actually makes your empathy stronger and more powerful. I like to say that it's useful to develop and try to develop and nurture a mind of a collector and constantly ask which piece or view are you and your team missing and should integrate next. And as Adela touched upon in her talk, try to be in the position of being data informed at all time, because in the end, it's your gut feeling, your empathy, and your decision that will make the right call for your user or customer. And you can and you should train these. So, a couple of takeaways: how not to get crazy running continuous discovery, and how to train your empathy in your organization. Recognize and be aware of the information flows around your product. Tune into them regularly, often, but not necessarily too deeply. Frequency and regularity is the key here. Build and share the common knowledge base, and do not throw away information. Spread it across your team and your organization. Each of us has a different background and pays attention to different things. Use this to your advantage. Don't be afraid to pull in big stakeholders into this either. And lastly, one bit of advice for designers specifically: take a step back. It's good and courageous to be an advocate for the users, but in order to do it effectively, to make decisions that are data informed rather than purely data driven. Learn to think in terms of impact. It will help you to communicate with your product managers on a completely different level, and they will be super grateful. And by paying attention and developing sense and empathy for the context, actually, you basically have an antidote to purely data-driven decisions, because you will point out the bullshit in there. And then you can act like a true facilitator and a middleman between all the various forces and information flows that shape the product in your organization. And I think that's exactly the role designers should have in any organization. That's it. Thank you. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Peter. It was really inspiring. Thanks for the talk. I actually do have one question for you. You were talking about continuous discovery and training our empathy. So, but still, it was a bit too abstract for me. Would you give 1 or 2 practical tips what to do or how to implement this into everyday work?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, one thing that's really, really useful and that's really easy to do is to be proactive with the information and context sharing across not just team, but everywhere. You can view this as in this push or pull philosophy, like you either can pull the information proactively from somewhere, or the information will get to you somehow automatically. And this is a thing that I'm trying to do in our design team, for example. Whenever I do these discovery calls and I learn something that I feel might be useful for someone else, I just proactively push them the information. I will send them like a timestamp recording. This is the stuff you might want to check out. And this actually, I started to observe that more and more people do this, and it's super useful and it alleviates you of many pains and many troubles throughout the process, because you don't have to search for it for something that's you don't know that there's some information like this. But if somebody serves you this information, it's amazing, and it's really nice, like a cultural tip to do. And you share the knowledge, and you build like shared ownership and everything, and it's really nice because it won't die with one person or somehow.
So sharing is caring, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
We have one question for you and Slido. So let me share it. Let's have a look. How do you work with the insights of empathy during the design process? What's your take on that?
Well, okay, favorite designer response, it depends. No, actually, during the design process, especially if you co-design with many other people, and if you try to pull other roles into designing with you, PMs or developers, or as Tomáš mentioned, we're trying to pull in other roles from the organization as well. When you have a deeper knowledge and broader knowledge, and you have this contextual knowledge, your empathy is much better fine-tuned to detect stuff that might not work for the people, because we all have our completely different viewpoint on some kind of problem. And your job as a designer, when you build empathy and when you gather insights, is to gather as many viewpoints as possible on this, and to be familiar with them, and to be familiar with their validity and with their overlaps. And this is how you can work with that. This is how you can rely. It builds you the information you can rely on if you want to design something for your user that's going to be appreciated or useful, actually. I hope that answered that. If not, I'm willing to chat about it more.
Yeah, feel free to drop more like questions or specify the question if it wasn't answered.
Yeah, or use the chat in YouTube.
Yep.
You'll get there.
Whatever you like. So, okay, we have one more question for you, Peter. So, many departments have context about customers. Customer success, for example. Any tips on extracting them?
You should never get yourself into a position that you should extract the information of someone. Well, it's good to make friends in the beginning. It's good to ask them and explain them why do you need that information in the first place, and just to ask for it. I think that you've seen the talk as well, Veronica, lately. That there's really good thing to notice that we designers claim to be the voice of the user, but how many of us speak to users all day, every day? So this is the case for customer success managers or for salespeople, especially. My experience is then when you explain them why do you need that and how valuable it is to you, and how can it impact the pains they see in the people they communicate with, they're more than willing to share it with you. Unless there's some super siloed mentality in there. But that's, as I mentioned, for completely another talk.
Yeah, it's also my experience showing them your motivation, your why it's important to have this kind of information is really helpful. So communicate this clearly, and it's it does wonders.
And it basically impacts the bottom line for these roles because, okay, customer success managers or support people want to have happy customers. Salespeople want to be able to offer something super interesting to the customers. So if it's like, okay, I pet my bag, you pet yours. It's like this scratching thing.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.
I guess this question will be answered in the Q&A at the end. So thank you, Peter, very much. And we have one more speaker, which is Petr Škoda. I will tune you in. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Veronica. Hello, everybody.
And this is your presentation, so we're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. So, hi, I'm Petr Škoda, and I'm tech lead at Kentico Content. And this is my opportunity to speak about product discovery from the development team's perspective. So, before I start, let me confess with something. I wasn't sure what product discovery is and how it actually affects my day at work. And why is that? Well, the product discovery sounds more like PM stuff, right? This is more for product management, or is it for UX designers, like UX stuff? And I think that most of the developers don't even know how it can relate to their work and how it can influence their day at the office. Well, as Tomáš already mentioned in his presentation, the dev teams in Kentico Content are part of the product discovery process. And before I jump into how it affects my work, I need to start with why. Why we are actually part of the product discovery and what it brings us. And the answer is ownership. Well, Tomáš mentioned that the dev teams in Kentico Content are responsible for the success of the feature. And by success, I don't mean that it's just technically perfect, that it is performant and it is scalable. But the true success of the feature is that the feature is used by customers and it actually solves some of the customers' needs. And of course, it's important that the feature has the right user experience so that the users are having the right experience along the way. But for the dev teams to actually achieve that, they need to be empowered to do the decisions because they need to shape the feature that way it has the biggest impact to the customers. And it means they need to make the right decisions when working on the feature. And for that, they need all the possible context so that they know what is most important and what is less important. And as you can as you can see, I'm getting to the product discovery slowly because that's the thing where the development team is getting their context. This is where the jobs to be done are discussed. This is where the goals and desired outcome is discussed as well. So this is why we as developers are part of the product discovery process. And let me jump into the process and explain it briefly once again. So on top of the graph, there is the alignment, and Tomasz already mentioned this is where we discuss the goals of the feature, desired outcomes, eventually key results, etc. Then we have explore and define and ideate. In these phases, we usually take part when we are researching competition, or we are discussing jobs to be done, or we are preparing the actual solution for the feature. Next, there is the creation phase, which is actual implementation of the feature, which is the usual work of the developers. And last but not least, the measurement phase. And in here, we are basically measuring the impact of the feature to our customers. So let's jump into the first phase, which I have the alignment here. In alignment, we are discussing the desired outcomes and the goals of the feature. And for that we use OKR's framework, which stands for objectives and key results. And I'm not going to talk about the framework and how you should properly define the key results for your projects. I just want to mention that since we as developers are taking part of this step, each of us understands the key results and the metrics for the feature to be successful. Also, every dev has some understanding of the related tasks. And what are those related tasks? Well, implemented feature by itself is not really enough for a feature to be successful. I mean, it can be more successful if you support it by other initiatives, for example, webinars or workshops, which is usually held by marketing team. Or you need to prepare, or someone needs to prepare a demo environment for sales guys. And these all are the tasks that help the feature to have bigger impact on customers. And I'm mentioning this because in a later phase, it will be important for the development team to have all of this information. But let me stop for a moment discussing my experience with key results. Well, sometimes or some key results are defined by the quantitative data of user interacting with your application. For example, a user is clicking on some button. So this is handled usually by some event tracking system, which can tell you how many times the event or the button was clicked by some user, for example. And this means you need to have some kind of tool in your application, and you need to gain the data out of it. And there are actually two scenarios. The first one is that you already have the data in place. You are tracking the events in your application and you feel like all the data are there and you're ready to go. Or the second scenario is that you need to obtain the data. And both of them are tricky in some ways. So let's discuss the first one. In the first one, you should make sure that you have the right data, because the original event has been added to your application with some purpose, which might be completely different than what your needs are currently. And it may happen that this event is not tracked in some different part of the application. And for example, there has been some recently added new page where the button is there as well. And even though the user clicks on the button, is it not reflected in your reports and de facto in your key results. So again, you need to make sure you understand the data properly and you know what you are actually tracking. For the second case, this might be not straightforward sometimes at all. Sometimes the key result is defined that way that you need to invest heavily into obtaining the data. For example, using a manpower so that it takes a lot of weeks to prepare the architecture, or you need to pay some money for a system which does the work for you. And you always need to consider this and think whether this is actually justified, because maybe slight altering of the key results will allow you to skip the implementation, and you don't need to invest heavily into obtaining the data. So think about the cost. So let's jump into the next phases, and these are explore, define, and ideate. And in these phases, what's different is that we are usually taking part in researching competition. And the reason is not that we just provide manpower to do that, because there is usually many competitions, but the thing is that we as developers get to see the real world. We are actually feeling the user experience of our competition. We can see how it's solved in their product, and we can learn a lot from that. Another thing that is that we are part of the discussions of jobs to be done. And even though this might be new to many developers, it's just important that we have the understanding of the customer's jobs. And this will be important in the next phase, which is the creation. So the creation is actually the implementation of the feature. This is basically where the development happens, and basically this is where the developers are doing their main part. And actually, in this part, the development team makes use of the gathered context. And how is that? Well, having the context gives the team some benefits. And for example, the dev team can change the scope easily right now. And question is, why would we even want to change the scope while we are implementing the feature? Well, many reasons. For example, since we know what is most important and what is less important, and we slowly build the feature, we might see that some of the features are not really supporting the success of the feature at the end, and we might just see that this should be cut out of the scope. Also, and I believe that you are already familiar with this, development is never going according to the plan. There is always some challenge, and there might be bigger challenges, there might be small challenges, but at the end, some changes might be inevitable, and you need to consider this as well. So there are influences which makes the team to change the scope of the feature. And so how is this changing of the scope easier now? Well, the dev team knows what are the jobs and outcomes, what is most important, what is less important. The dev team can evaluate what part of the scope is easily to be cut. And this is important because at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to bring the feature to the world and to have the biggest impact possible. Also, there is less communication overhead. So what does it mean? Tomasz already mentioned that since development teams have all the possible context, they don't need to ask every tiny question to your PM. Basically, most of the tiny things we can solve within the team, and maybe we just let our PM or UX designer know that such a change is happening, and we just have a 5-minute call where we let them know, and it's done. Also, the dev team is responsible and empowered to do the changes in the scope, and it means that there is no need to go to stakeholders and ask for their permissions, because it's our responsibility and they know it, and they just want to be informed about major changes which are strategic for the whole company. For example, changes in the release dates. All right, there is another benefit of having context, and is that when we were discussing the related tasks, we actually know what these tasks are and what teams are are working on these tasks. So for example, as a before mentioned workshops or webinars, we know that if we do some change in the scope or the release date, we can directly contact marketing team, let them know that their webinar needs to be moved or there is some change in the content of the webinar. So this also adds to the streamlined communication, that we don't need to contact multiple levels and we just let the affected parties know. All right. This brings us to the last but not least phase, which is measure. And this phase basically happens once the feature is released to production and you are starting to see the impact of the feature to your customers. Hopefully there is some impact to your customers. And it needs to be said that the features do not live in a closed environment. Usually there are many other teams that are just currently building their features, and the source code of the application is always changed. And sometimes there are changes which are unwanted or which are hidden, and you are not aware of those. And it may happen that in your key results or in your reports that you are tracking, you see sudden changes of your data, and this might indicate that that you just released perfect feature which has great impact on your customers and everyone is happy. Well, that would be great, but usually that might indicate that the condition of events has changed and you need to check the underlying source of your data. So make sure you change it first and then open your champagne. So this actually brought us to the end of the discussions about how the dev teams are taking part in the product discovery process. And you might see that there are some benefits. Of course, we are delivering better product, which is more focused on our real customers' needs, but there is also the other side. And those are the additional requirements for developers or TLs. So what about devs and TLs? Well, since we are responsible, or eventually the TL is responsible for the success of the feature, we need to be closer to business. And it might be it might mean that TL or someone needs to be familiar with product management stuff, like frameworks or methods. For example, OKRs, opportunity solution trees, how might we questions, and etc., and many more. And usually those are not aware of such tools, so they need to learn these things. Also, it's quite usual sometimes to have a contact with customers. Recently, it's not so often, but anyway, this is part of our job. And usually, even though usually this is done by product management or UX designers, sometimes it might be most effective to just contact the customer directly. Yeah. Another thing is that not just TL needs to have business-oriented mindset. Since the whole dev team is taking part in the product discovery process, everyone needs to have customers in mind. And as I'm thinking about all these points, it's clear that this might not suit everyone. I can imagine developers who are only willing to spend their time with the technicalities of the feature, like the performance stuff, database, and etc. And those might not be really interested in the business side of things. But anyway, I think that development teams having taken part in the product discovery process was the right move. And I think at the end of the day, we are creating better product, which is more focused on the actual needs of the customers, and while developers have bigger impact on the product. And I believe that at the end of the day, developers have fulfillment of great work and great impact. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop a line. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It was a great talk. I have a question for you, because you said it might not suit everyone. So I want to ask you, like, how was the transition for you personally? You know, going from not very involved developer to a person who actually is talking to users, who's very involved in this, you know, research process and stuff. So what about you?
Cool. Yeah. Fortunately, I don't need to speak to customers so much recently. But anyway, all this process was a little bit out of the comfort zone, of my comfort zone, as basically any other new thing that I need to do. But the important thing is that I understand the reasons behind it. That when we started with this basically experiment, I learned that it has these benefits quite quickly, and since I could see the results almost immediately, I was sold. So I knew that even though I need to do some things that are not comfortable to me, I just knew I need to do it. And
Yeah.
also I need to say that we are basically not owners of the whole product discovery, and I didn't need to learn everything. And actually, the product management and UX designers, they have the most knowledge about this process, and we as a dev teams are basically listening to what they have to say, and without them it won't be possible. So thank you, PMs and UX designers, for all your help.
You're welcome. So basically what you're saying, it's not that much pressure, you know, it's not just on you. So you're just, you know, like supporting the process, if I understand it right.
Yeah, well, you definitely need to have great PM and great user designer to help you with all the process.
Yeah.
That helps
I
a lot.
agree. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much, Peter. I think we, you know, can wrap it up, or like we finished our talks. So I think we can go through the questions in Slido. So I will invite all our speakers to the stream. Hi guys. Welcome back. And let me show the questions. There is quite a few of them, so that's really nice. So let's start. Peter, I think it's for you, Peter Škoda. How do you see that devs are wasting time not implementing? Do you see that as a problem?
Great question. Well, there are two things. The first one, I can see that this might be a problem for junior developers because they probably want to learn to code. They need to learn to code, and they expect that they will spend a lot of their time in their coding environment. But at the same time, they need to understand that this is part of the job, and it's important for a company to do it this way. So so I expect that when as they are getting more and more senior, they will start taking bigger part in the process and helping our rest of the team. And also another thing is that I think that it's not a problem that we are wasting our time. I think that it looks like this process is very efficient for the company, and if it means that we as a company are building better product when the developers are spending some of their time learning or getting the context rather than blindly developing some weird feature, then this is definitely worth it.
And maybe do you see some downside to it, perhaps?
Well, yeah, if sometimes the project might be quite difficult, and if you don't have enough resources to do the research, it might take a lot of time, and you might basically be stuck with the research for so long that you are not really implementing anything, and it might influence developers in a negative way. So we need to be aware that they need to do something continuously.
Yeah, sure. Agreed. Okay, thank you. We can move on. This one is for Tomáš. What were the biggest challenges for you in the shift to working with your teams more?
Good question. Thank you. Let me think about that. Well, perhaps the biggest challenge was realizing, because let me take a step back, because although in the long term it really eases your job and gives you time as a product manager to focus on more strategic things instead of investing everything into the discovery process, but from the short term it also requires a lot of extra time investment and effort investment for people to educate them, to support them, etc. So perhaps the biggest challenge was to consciously invest a lot of extra effort in building the empathy in teams. But it also then helps because sometimes there is this herd immunity in the dev team where and it's very difficult to get everyone on your side with this mindset. Then it definitely helps to try to build a rapport and a relationship with someone from the team who then understands the motivations and then helps spread the word to the team.
Thanks, Tom. We have also a question for Adela. What would you advise if your company pushes for quick results and research tends to be skipped, or there's not enough time for the research? Any advice on that? That's a tough question, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds like a really tough question. It's really difficult to incorporate research in a company, but when it comes to quick results, I would say that it's good to discuss the expectations and discuss what actually goes into the research, and talk about what that you have to plan it, that you have to invite the users, that you have to do the talks or calls, and that you have to write the notes, and then you have to analyze the data, and then you have to put them in some sort of nice way which can be shared and useful. So this is something that maybe some people don't realize, and so talking about this is one thing, and the other thing is actually streamlining the process. In my experience, what takes the most time is recruiting the participants. So what I'm what I always suggest is recruiting early, maybe even before the research design is finalized, because usually you have an idea of who the users are that you are interested in, so that you can choose the participants sooner than you have the script all written up or prepared.
Mhm.
So streamlining like this, I think it's something that works really well.
Cool, thank you. I think it answers it well. Well, Peter Skoda, which part of the process did you find the most difficult to accommodate to personally? Maybe we kind of covered it in my question, but if you want to comment on that as well.
Well, sure. If I look at it from the perspective of product discovery process, the picture, I still struggle most with the first one, with the alignment, and specifically with the objectives and key results, because it seems like it's easy stuff, but actually you need to understand it properly, like deeply understand the concept, so that you know how to properly set your key results. And with the problems of event data and the things that I mentioned in my presentation, it's just that adds to the difficulty. And yeah, I always struggle with that.
I see. Okay, thank you. There's a question for Tomasz. You spoke about conducting experiments, right? What if there's a need to speed it up? How would you make the experiments even shorter than now?
Yeah, this is a tough question because we are still figuring it out and trying to learn ourselves. And well, yeah, there is this ideal, right, that people are doing design sprints in 2 weeks or a week. And sometimes, well, it might be more difficult in certain concepts, but right now we are focusing on delivering like the actual production feature or experiment to the product to test, for example, as an early access or a closed beta. But if we were to move it for even shorter periods, then I believe that we would move past the production testing and, for example, do prototype testings. But it would also require changing the whole process so that the whole team is involved in the discovery using the prototype and experiments that are not actually in the production. So we'll see. We'll try to experiment and we can repeat this session.
We can add some comments later once we are smarter on this topic. Or maybe you can, you guys who are watching, you can share your ideas as well. We would really love that. Very well. I think this is for Peter Skoda again. What is your experience with developers not wanting to participate in research or OKR's definition or any other not traditional dev activity?
Very good question. Well, frankly, in my team, this is not a big problem, but what I know is that with junior developers, then usually tend to be quiet on meetings where this is discussed, because they feel like they have nothing to say and they need to be quiet. So my experience is to just talk to them and explain that it is necessary to express any thought, whether this is relevant or not, because anyone can have a great idea. And basically that's the only experience that I have. So maybe it's not enough for answering the question, but that's all I got.
Yeah, I guess motivating your teammates to participate, it's always a good question. You not force them, but motivate that it just really makes sense.
Yeah, just to consistently express that it's important, and sooner or later it will change.
Good advice. Thanks. We have a few more questions. There's still time to add more, so guys, feel free to ask us while we are live. Adela, do you do research outside of UX too? for example, sales, marketing, etc.?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of research, maybe?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I actually do that quite a bit. For example, right now I'm working on a customer journey map, basically, and it came from our marketing team, or the need to do it came from our marketing team, and so yeah, I'm doing these sort of big research studies for different kind of outside of UX.
That's cool. Maybe do you think that UX researchers, maybe in other software companies, do it similarly, that they share their knowledge across the various teams, or maybe do they have some dedicated researcher? Do you have some insights on that?
Well, there are different ways in which UX research or user research can work within a company. Some are, embedded in teams, in dev teams, and in this instance, they would most likely do the discovery research and stuff like that. Here in Kentico, it's mostly the PMs and the designers actually, and I'm there more like a reviewer.
Guide.
Yeah, or a guide if necessary, and I can take over if needed. But it's on the PMs and on designers usually. So in some companies it can be very much embedded in the dev team, and in others it really depends on how the company is set up. So it's hard to difficult
Yeah.
to answer. Sorry.
As Peter said, it depends. It's just like typical UX answer on everything. So.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Thanks. Great. Peter, any good resources on holistic empathy?
Well, if you search for holistic empathy, I don't think you will find many things, because that's like a term I came up with. But what I found to be really useful, yeah, I don't know. What I found really useful was to dive deeper into basically product management stuff. There's a really good primer I have. It's called Building Products for the Enterprise. And it's basically about being a product manager for in a B2B sphere. And a lot of stuff like this. I highly recommend stuff like, I don't know, Product Talk, Teresa Torres, as Tomáš Hrubý mentioned. There's this new book she released lately about continuous discovery and how to build all this stuff, and I'm really looking forward to it because it's already on the way. So yeah, I would recommend you to dive deeper into this stuff and just skip over the stuff if you don't find it super interesting. find the right resource you would like to pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. Thank you. If anyone wants to add something, you can, of course, jump in from you others.
There's another one about product discovery, as I see. So
yeah,
any other recommendations?
There's like a question for anyone of you, everyone who can recommend something. Maybe not just a book, but any resource that's valuable for you and in regards to product discovery. Any tip? You were all mentioning Teresa Torres, so I guess that's one resource. Maybe anything from her might be handy, but Tomáš unmuted himself, so maybe he wants to add.
Yeah, well, again, like most of you know the book, but yeah, the book Inspire or Empowered from Arctic again is a good start to have an overview of the process. But lately, a good resource I found on this discovery process and its different parts is from a German product management consultant, and he's called Tim Herbig. So you might Google him, and he has a lot of resources on also the things that coincidentally we adopted in the last 2 years.
Thank
I
you.
second on the Marty Kagan books.
Thanks. Perfect. Okay, so we can maybe jump into the last question so far. So Peter Škoda, question for Peter. Do you think it's important that all members of a team, devs, participate in the product discovery equally?
That's a very good question too. And my short answer is yes. I think that sooner or later you need to have all of your people onboarded, and you need all of your people to have the same information. Whether it means that they know what features are be building, in what way, like the technical stuff. They also need to see the business side, why we are doing it this way, because everyone in the team is doing decisions. It's not just me or anyone else, and anyone takes the same role of having the ownership of the result. So if the team is not aligned and the information is not spread in the whole team equally, then there will be tension sooner or later. So basically the devs will participate in the product discovery, or the TL or someone else will share the knowledge and let them know. So but at the end of the day, all of them need to have the same knowledge.
Yeah, I wanted to oppose to that actually, because well, perhaps so. I agree with you with the part that everyone needs to have a good amount of insight or context or the base level. As I was describing, like during the problem definition, you need to make sure that everyone understands it. But that's not the only part of the discovery process. And well, I don't think that the optimal solution is to like normalize everyone's engagement and enthusiasm, and sometimes it's much better to make compromises, for example, and to empower people who are interested, and for example they take on more initiatives than people who focus on the development. But you need to find the balance, and definitely everybody needs to have the full context, but not everybody needs to like as actively involved in prioritizations, ideations, or experimentations as others. But yeah, you definitely should, because this needs to be in balance, because once proactive people in this gets more and more tasks and less proactive people gets less tasks, then you get too extreme. So you need to balance the things, but not to an equal level.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree, and Tomáš said it nicely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks, Tomáš and Peter. And overall, like, thanks for the discussion and for your visitors for the questions, and you for the answers, and for the talks. I guess we have all answers, answered. No answers, questions answered. That's right. So I think we can wrap it up slowly. I have one more slide to show, not to forget. So let me manage it. Okay. Just a disclaimer that we in Kentico host also a bunch of other events. So among them, for example, for Agile or developer community. So if you would be interested what we plan to do and speak about, just go to this link, to this address, and you'll find all the information there. And yeah, thank you again. thanks visitors, thanks for speakers, and that's all from our side. So bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.